This is Mrs. Zappia with Lesson 6, Solutions to a Linear Equation. Student outcomes for this lesson. Students transform equations into simpler forms using the distributive property. Students learn that not every linear equation has a solution. Pause the video and copy the essential question. How do you distribute a negative or a minus sign? Example 1. What value of x would make the linear equation true? What is the best first step and why? Remember that the distributive property will allow us to better see and work with the terms of the linear equation. In order to find out what the solution might be, we must first use the distributive property. The left side of the equation has the following expression: 4x plus 3 times the quantity 4x plus 7. Where and how will the distributive property be used? We'll need to use the distributive property to expand this portion, 3 times the quantity 4x plus 7. Then again to collect like terms. Our work for right now will be on the left side of the equation, and the right side will remain unchanged for the moment. The 4x will remain unchanged. Distribute the 3 to both of the terms inside the parentheses. 3 times 4x is 12x. 3 times 7 is 21. We use the distributive property to expand 3 times the quantity 4x plus 7. Now we'll use it again to collect like terms. Here we'll factor out the x and add the coefficients. Factoring out the x, that leaves us with 4 plus 12. Bring down the plus 21. 4 plus 12 is 16. 16 times x is 16x. That's using the distributive property to collect like terms. Often, we do that step mentally. We are done simplifying the left side of the equation. Now let's focus on the right side of the equation. Again, we'll use the distributive property, and then now the left side will remain unchanged. Notice the term minus 3 is outside of the parentheses, so we will not distribute to the minus 3. When we distribute the 4 to both terms inside the parentheses, that gives us 28x plus 12. Bring down the minus 3. Next, simplify plus 12 minus 3. 28x remains unchanged. 12 minus 3 is 9. So we have 28x plus 9. We've simplified both sides of the equation, and I'm just going to bring these down so that they're at the same spot. 28x plus 9. We are now ready to solve our equation. What would be the most efficient step to do first? I am going to subtract 16x from both sides of the equation. This is the subtraction property of equality. This gives me a 0 pair. On the left, I now have 21. On the right, I have 12x plus 9. Next, I'll subtract 9 from both sides of the equation. This is the subtraction property of equality. This simplifies to 12 equals 12x. Finally, divide by the coefficient. A number divided by itself is 1. 1 times x is x. 12 divided by 12 is 1. The solution to this equation is x equals 1. Is x equal 1 really a solution to the equation? How do you know? Go back to the original equation and substitute 1 for each value of x. You can use a calculator for this step. I'm going to go back up to the top here, and actually let's do it at the very top. And what I want to do is I want to take each value of x and replace it with 1. So this is going to be 4 times 1 plus 3 times the quantity, 4 times 1 plus 7, close your parentheses, equals 4 times the quantity, 7 times 1, plus 3, close your parentheses, and subtract 3. Now use your calculator and calculate the value on the left side of the equation and press equal. Write your answer here. Then calculate the value on the right side of the equation, press equal, and write the value here. Pause the video and complete this step. The value on the left is 37. The value on the right is 37. Since the value on the left equals the value on the right, you have proven that x equals 1 is correct. Next, it says to list the properties that we used. First, we used the distributive property. We used that to expand this term. Next, we used the distributive property again. This time, we used it to collect or combine like terms. Then, we used the subtraction property of equality. When we subtracted 9 from both sides, we used the subtraction property of equality. When we divided by the coefficient, that is the division property of equality. Notice that we used the distributive property to simplify before we started to solve. Once we were ready to start solving the equation, we used the properties of equality. Let's continue with example 2. What value of x would make the following linear equation true? Since we have a group of terms that is preceded by a negative sign, or a minus sign, we will simplify this first. The minus sign, or the negative sign, means we need to take the opposite of each term within the group, that is to say, the parentheses. We'll begin on the left side of the equation. We only need to take the opposite of the terms within the grouping symbols. Is minus 2 within the grouping symbol? No, it is not. So we won't take the opposite of minus 2. Bring down the 20. Remember to take the opposite of everything in the grouping symbol. The opposite of 3x is negative 3x. So we will subtract 3x. Our second term is minus 9. The opposite of minus 9 is plus 9. Bring down the minus 2. Continue to simplify. Let's use the properties of addition to rearrange the commutative and associative property, to regroup. So we have 20 plus 9 minus 2 minus 3x. When you are rearranging an equation or an expression, make sure that you move the term with the operation carefully. This minus 2 stayed minus 2, and the minus 3x stayed minus 3x. Go ahead and simplify. 20 plus 9 is 29. Minus 2 is 27. 27 minus 3x. Next, we'll simplify the right side of the equation. On the right side of the equation, we have a negative sign in front of the grouping symbols. This means to take the opposite of each term in the grouping symbols. The first term is negative 11x. The opposite of negative 11x is 11x. The second term is plus 1. The opposite of plus 1 is minus 1. So when you are subtracting the quantity, remember that you are actually subtracting both terms in that quantity. So we are subtracting negative 11x, which means we are adding 11x, and we are subtracting 1. So that becomes 11x minus 1. I'm going to bring that down, and I have transformed my equation into simplest form. At this point, I'm ready to solve my equation, so I need to determine what would be the most efficient first step. For my first step, I am going to add 3x to both sides of the equation. Then I simplify. That leaves me with 27 on the left is equal to 14x minus 1 on the right. Next, I'm going to add 1 to both sides of the equation. Simplify. This gives me 28 on the left and 14x on the right. At this point, you can probably see that the solution to the equation is 2. Divide by the coefficient, both sides of the equation. 28 divided by 14 is 2. 14 divided by 14 is 1. 1 times x is x. The solution to the equation is x equals 2. Next, record the steps to solving the equation here. The first step that we did was the distributive property. We distributed the minus sign to the grouping in the parentheses. Then we simplified. Then we did the distributive property again. We distributed the negative to the terms in the parentheses. Next, we used the addition property of equality. Then, when we added 1, we used the addition property of equality. Finally, we used the division property of equality. In this problem, we simplified first using the distributive property. Once both sides of the equation were simplified, then we used the properties of equality to solve the equation. Example 3. Do this problem on your own later for extra practice. Let's continue to problem 4. Example 4, there are 2 parts, part A on this page and part B on the next page. For example 4, consider the equation. What value of x will make this equation true? Use the distributive property to simplify the left side of the equation. That gives us 2x plus 2. bring down the right side of the equation, 2x minus 3. Both sides of the equation cannot be simplified, so we are ready to solve. For my first step, I am going to subtract 2x from both sides of the equation. This is the subtraction property of equality. This gives me a 0 pair, leaving on the left side 2. On the right side, this equals a 0 pair, leaving me with minus 3, or negative 3. How do we interpret 2 equals negative 3? Since 2 does not equal negative 3, this equation has no solution. You can check and see if maybe there is a number that would work for x, such as 0, or 1, or a fraction, or a negative. Pause the video and see if you can find a solution that will work for x and make this a true statement. You are correct. There is no value of x that will make this a true statement. So for this problem, there is no solution. Example 4b. What value of x would make the following linear equation true? Transform the equation by simplifying both sides. Pause the video and do this step on your own. I've simplified the left side of the equation and ended up with 33 minus 18x. Next, transform the right side of the equation and then resume the video to check your work. When I distributed the negative 6 or the minus 6 to both terms inside the grouping, I ended up with minus 18x plus 30. Then I changed the order so that I could combine my like terms, 4 plus 30. Next, I am ready to solve the equation. To solve this equation, my first step is going to be to add 18x to both sides of the equation. This is the addition property of equality. On the left, this simplifies to 33. On the right, this simplifies to 34. Since 33 does not equal 34, this equation has no solution. Example 5. Do this problem on your own later for extra practice. At this time, we'll conclude the lesson by going to the summary. In this lesson, you have learned the distributive property is used to simplify expressions. For example, 3x minus 5x. We factor out the x, leaving us with 3 minus 5 times x. We subtract the coefficients. 3 minus 5 is negative 2. Negative 2 times x is negative 2x. At this point, many of you are doing this step in your head, and that's great. But the distributive property is why it works. Next, the distributive property is used to expand expressions. For example, negative 2 times the quantity 5x plus 4 is equal to negative 10x minus 8, because negative 2 times 5x is negative 10x, and negative 2 times 4 is negative 8. And adding a negative 8 is the same as subtracting 8. The distributive property is applied only to terms within a group. In this example, we have 4 times the quantity, 3x plus 5, then subtract 2. The 4 is only applied to the terms inside the grouping for the distributive property. The minus 2 is excluded. Finally, An equation can have no solution. Here are two examples.